The wire is what gives us Barksdale. It gives us the whole crew, day by day, piece by piece.
Alright, so we've gone over the pilot episode in detail. Now let's take a look at the rest of Season 1. The Barksdale detail is set up with the task of bringing a charge against Avon Barksdale. However, since the bosses want quick results instead of a prolonged and effective investigation, they fill the unit with useless police officers. These include Prez Belusky, an incompetent officer who's only on the force because his father-in-law is a major, and Lester Freeman, an older man who spent most of his career in the pawn shop unit and spends his days working on furniture for dollhouses. This is also complicated by Daniel's own past. Though a good police officer, the FBI previously investigated him for stealing drug money from evidence when he was a narcotics officer. That and his ambition to rise to major makes McNulty think that he isn't serious about the case. The investigation gets off to a bad start. They try to make the case by doing street-level busts, hoping to catch some mid-level players and flip them. Not only is this ineffective, Herc, Carver, and Prez get themselves in trouble by starting a pointless fight in the towers. Prez ends up taking a kid's eye out due to his reckless behavior. The street busts do not end up satisfying Judge Phelan, so Deputy Burrell authorizes Daniels to do the case for real. They then start to pursue a wiretap against the Barksdale crew, including their pagers. Freeman reveals that he isn't actually a hump, first by finding Avon's photo in a boxing gym, then by figuring out Dee's pager number from a clue from the stash house. Freeman tells McNulty how he used to be a homicide detective. However, he was buried in the pawn shop unit after disobeying the bosses. He warns McNulty that the same thing is going to happen to him because of his disobedience in pursuing the Barksdales. He is right, as the homicide commander Rawls, who hates McNulty's guts, orders fellow detective Santangelo to get dirt on him. He threatens to demote him unless he betrays a fellow police officer. Prez also ends up proving himself useful after all. The phone numbers from the pagers are being encrypted in some kind of code. Prez ends up breaking the code after realizing that all the numbers are being flipped in their position on the phone. Meanwhile, Dee continues to run the pit crew. He also starts a relationship with Chardine, a bar girl from Orlando's club. Though he has a baby mama and a newborn son, Dee doesn't feel at home with them or in the drug game, and Chardine is his escape from both realities. The Barksdales are incredibly disciplined and careful when it comes to guarding against police, making sure never to reveal sensitive information on the phone. However, one night, his stash is robbed by Omar, a legendary figure in Baltimore who makes his living by robbing drug dealers. His signature move is to whistle the farmer in the dell, which announces his presence and often scares dealers into giving up their goods without a fight. Angered at being robbed, Avon sets a bounty on Omar and his crew, especially after learning that Omar is gay. They eventually find Omar's lover Brandon, whom they torture and kill to send a message. The brutality of the murder causes PTSD in Wallace, a young boy working for Dee, as he was the one who identified Brandon. Despite being in the game, Wallace is innocent, taking care of his many younger siblings after their father was killed by the Black Panther. He decides that he doesn't want to be in the game anymore. Dee is sympathetic, as he's struggling with his own feelings about the drug business. He gives Wallace money and his blessing to leave the life. In response to Brandon's murder, Omar agrees to work with the police to take the Barksdales down. He provides them information about the Gant murder, mainly because the killing of a normal citizen goes against his moral code. With his information, they arrest Bird for the murder. Because of the suspicious police activity lately, the Barksdales decide to change things up. They rip out the payphones in the pit, which messes up the wiretap. However, the police are still able to follow the pagers and intercept a money exchange between the Barksdales and Damian Price, an aide for State Senator Clay Davis. The arrest, though completely justified, angers Burrell because of the connection to a powerful politician. He demands that they shut down the investigation. However, an intervention from Judge Phelan keeps the wiretap up for the full 60 days that they were ordered. However, the case hits another roadblock when one of their key suspects, Stinkum, is killed by Omar as part of his revenge for Brandon. The police bring Omar in and ask him not to kill any more Barksdale people, but he reminds them that he might not have a choice as they are coming after him hard. Meanwhile, Bubbles and Johnny attend Narcotics Anonymous meetings, which is part of Johnny's probation requirements after getting arrested. Though Johnny isn't really interested in getting clean, Bubbles takes the message to heart and decides to stop using. He reconnects with his sister, whom he has burned many times in the past with his drug use. She agrees to let him stay in her basement, but refuses to let him come upstairs. The detail begins tracking the many front businesses that Avon uses, hoping to follow the trail of money. This puts Daniels in a tough position, as the money will inevitably lead to powerful people that the bosses do not want coming to light. However, the investigation is temporarily paused when all the dealers of Baltimore come together for an East Side versus West Side basketball game. The East Side is led by Proposition Joe, a big-time player on the other end of town. The game reflects a friendly rivalry between the different sides of Baltimore, with the loser having to throw a party for the other side. Prop Joe ends up winning, much to Avon's chagrin. After the game, Prop Joe is approached by Omar. He offers a stash he stole off the Barksdales for Avon's pager number, which Prop Joe provides. Afterwards, he pages Avon outside Orlando's club, which ironically he got the location for from the police information board when they brought him in. When Avon goes outside, Omar tries to shoot him, but Weebay intervenes and saves Avon. Afterwards, the Barksdales offer a truce to Omar. However, in reality, they're planning on killing him once he comes out into the open. Knowing that Baltimore is no longer safe for him, Omar gets on a bus to New York, but promising to return for Bird's trial. Meanwhile, The Wire begins to make several breakthroughs. The first one being they find the main stash house where the Barksdales are keeping their drugs. They also bring in Wallace and get him to agree to testify against Stringer Bell about the murder of Brandon. They stash Wallace at his grandmother's house in the country and plan to bring him back for the trial. They also bring in Chardine and show her that one of her friends from the club was killed and dumped in the trash. The callousness of her disposal convinces her to turn on the Barksdales. She breaks up with Dee and agrees to be an informant at the club. She and Freeman also have a little bit of a flirtatious relationship. Though the investigation is making progress, Judge Phelan has become less enthusiastic after his role in it causes him to lose the political connections he needs to get reelected. Another development happens when Orlando, the owner of Avon's club, is arrested after attempting to buy drugs on his own. In order to save himself, he offers to cooperate with the police. The bosses want to use Orlando to buy drugs from the Barksdales, hoping to catch Avon or other high-level people in the sting. Though the detail knows that this is hopeless, they're forced to go through with the plan. Kima goes along for the buy as an undercover. The police lose track of her car as they head into an alley for a buy. However, it's revealed to be a trap, with the Barksdales knowing that Orlando was a snitch. They shoot up the car, killing Orlando and wounding Kima critically in the process. The entire police department works to hunt down Kima's shooters. They identify Savino as the one who set up the hit, and eventually connect Weebay and Little Man as the shooters. However, Savino was careful not to incriminate himself, and thus will only have to serve 3 years on a minor charge. McNulty is particularly devastated by Kima's shooting, believing himself to be responsible. Rawls, who hates McNulty, uncharacteristically reassures him that he's not responsible for her getting shot. It's a great example of how The Wire handles characters. Even assholes like Rawls are not presented as one-dimensional villains, but real people with good and bad qualities. The police commissioner, who despite not caring about Kima enough to comfort her girlfriend, wants to use the opportunity to make himself look good. He orders that the police kick in doors and seize all the drugs they can for a photo op. The detail tries to hide the stash house from this, hoping to instead use it to make an actual case against Avon. However, the bosses find out, as they have a rat in the unit, and order them to seize the drugs. McNulty tries to go to Phelan for his support, but the judge has been put back on the mayor's ticket after agreeing to back off from the Barksdale's case. McNulty also recruits Bubbles to find information about the shooting. Bubbles tries unsuccessfully to tell McNulty that he's now clean, and that going back to the terrace will put his recovery in danger. After the raids and finding out that Kino was a cop, the Barksdales change up again. They ditch their pagers, which renders the wire dead. Weebay hides out in Philadelphia, and they begin to get rid of anyone who can lead back to them. This includes Little Man, who did the shooting, the security lady they bribed during Dee's trial, and they also want Wallace, since he was the one who identified Brandon. Dee, however, refuses to give up Wallace's location, as he doesn't believe that he would ever flip. The killings alert the police to the fact that the Barksdales are getting rid of anyone who can hurt them. They realize that they forgot about Wallace after Kino's shooting. They try to get him back, but he's already left his grandmother's and returned to Baltimore. Dee tries to warn him that he's in danger, but Wallace insists that this is the only life he knows. When Stringer finds out that Wallace is back, he orders Bodie to kill him. Despite the fact that they're all friends and all still basically kids, Bodie and Poot follow their orders and gun Wallace down in his room. Meanwhile, Avon orders Dee to drive up to New York and pick up some new product to replace the load that the police took. However, the police learn about this and put a tracking device on Dee's car. When he makes the pickup, he's arrested by the state police. McNulty and Daniels try to interrogate him, but by now Dee is wise to their manipulations. However, before they leave, they inform him that Wallace was murdered. Though he feigns disbelief, he knows it is true, and that his people were behind it. When Levi and Stringer come to arrange his defense, he screams at them for killing the boy and wants nothing more to do with their crew. While the wire has been dead, Freeman and the others have been looking into campaign finance reports for various Baltimore politicians. Avon has been donating to various political funds using drug money, and they realize that the reason is so that the police will revitalize the area of Baltimore that he controls. When they do, all of his vacant properties will be bought by the city for millions of dollars, making him a legitimately rich man. The potential ramifications of this investigation to his politician friends causes Burrell to order the investigation shut down and the arrest of Barksdale on the weak drug charges they already have. He threatens to reveal Daniels' corrupt past in the Eastern Drug Unit, but Daniels refuses to break down. Though he can't stop the arrest, he insists that he will continue to investigate as long as he's able. The next day, the police move to arrest Avon. Stringer gets off free since Wallace was their only link to him. Since the charge on Avon was weak, he gets out on bail and immediately begins planning on how to minimize his exposure. They move their operation to a funeral parlor that they own and move to start resupplying with drugs. Kima then awakens from her coma. Bunk tries to get her to identify both of her shooters, but she refuses to falsely identify Weebay since she didn't actually see his face. This moral conviction will be an important detail later on. The detail isn't satisfied with the current drug charges and want to continue the investigation. With Burrell getting ready to shut them down, they discuss bringing the case to the feds who are outside of Burrell's control. However, they get a new break when Dee reaches out and says that he's willing to cooperate. He's become disillusioned with the game and wants to start over in witness protection. He agrees to give them his uncle in exchange for this fresh start. He also gives them Weebay's location in Philadelphia where he's hiding out. They then arrest him and bring him back to Baltimore. With their information, they bring the case to the FBI. However, the FBI is only interested in going after corrupt politician and plan to offer Avon and Stringer a plea if they give information on Clay Davis and others. The police refuse to give up the case since it will mean continued suffering in the streets if the Barksdales are set free. As the detail is being sent home, Daniels confronts Carver. He knows that Carver is the spy in the unit reporting information to Burrell, which is why he received a promotion to sergeant even though Herc scored higher on the test. Daniels warns him that the men under him will look to him as their leader, and if he continues with these games, the next generation will follow suit. This is a hint at how Daniels ended up dirty from his time in the Eastern District. Dee ends up deciding not to flip after being convinced by his mother, Avon's sister. Without his testimony, they have only the small drug charge against Avon. Levi offers a structured plea, in which all of the members of the Barksdale organization will plead guilty in exchange for reduced sentences. Though they're unhappy with the low amount of jail time, the DA's office has no choice but to accept. At the sentencing hearing, Avon is given a measly 7 years. Wee-Bey has pled guilty to all of his murders to get off death row and is given life in prison. The other members get a mix of around 10 to 15 years each. However, since D refused to cooperate with the police, he's given a maximum sentence of 20 years. McNulty is despondent after the verdict, as despite all of his efforts, nothing he did has really mattered in the grand scheme. Stringer is still free and will continue their operation until Avon is released after his short stint. He's also informed by Rawls that he's being thrown out of homicide to another department as punishment for his actions. As the season ends, we get a montage of all the major characters set to Step by Step by Jesse Winchester, which is very thematic for the season. We see that Daniels has been passed over for Major because of his defiance to Burrell. On the other hand, Carver is promoted to Sergeant because of his obedience. Freeman ends up back in Homicide because of his good work on the case. Bubbles has also relapsed due to the stress of Kima being shot, and is back to his old schemes. Santangelo has been assigned to a foot patrol as punishment for not ratting on McNulty. Bodie has been promoted to a tower, and Poot is now running the pit. Stringer continues to run the drug trade from their new funeral office. McNulty ends up in the Marine unit, the one place he did not want to end up. Kima is still in the hospital, sadly wondering if her police career that she loved is over. And all the while, the drug business continues in Baltimore, the same as it always has. The final scene of the season shows Omar in New York, robbing a drug dealer. As he says, "It's all in the game." Overall, Season 1 does an incredible job of setting up the series. We get introduced to the themes and ideas that will continue to be developed throughout the series. The game, the institutional failure, and the fact that this isn't a show that will neatly tie everything up. By the end, the police have failed to meaningfully stop the Barksdales and are now scattered and in a worse position than when they started. There's also a particular element of realism present in the show. Several scenes show that the police are just barely missing key details, often due to mundane reasons like the fact that they just weren't paying attention. It does a lot to dispel the myths that we often see on television about cops, and I'll have more to talk about that in my homicide section. One scene in particular that stands out is when the cops are trying to get a desk through a door. They each work to get it through, not realizing that they're pushing against each other and ultimately getting nowhere. It's a strong metaphor for how the institutions of Baltimore work against themselves and are thus ultimately useless to the people they're trying to be helping. But that's it for the first season. Now let's take a look at Season 2 and see where the series goes from here.